some things are just perfection, like as much as I love putting a new spin on tradition, there are some things that chicken soup, you don't mess with chicken. The truth is I did mess with chicken soup.
Welcome to 18 Jewish Foods, Culture and History in Kosher Bite-Sized Portions. This podcast tells the stories of iconic Jewish dishes, shedding light on the people who eat them. Here's your host, Joel Haber.
The food I'll be looking at in this episode is a beloved street food in Israel, and it is also well known around the world. I'm referring to Bourekas. What is less known, perhaps, is that they are a genuinely Jewish food, not only because Jews invented them, but because they reflect our history. Most of the Jews of Turkey came from Spain following the expulsion in 1492. And when the Christians kicked us out of Spain, the Muslims in Turkey, or in the Ottoman Empire, welcomed us in. As Gil Marks pointed out in Encyclopedia of Jewish Food, the Bourekas are a perfect example of what happens when people move from one place to another. When you move, you miss the foods you ate back home, so you keep cooking them. And so these Sephardic, Spanish, and Portuguese Jews kept cooking foods from Iberia. For example, empanadas. In medieval Spain, empanadas were among the foods used to identify secret crypto-Jews to the Inquisition authorities. Anyone familiar with Bourekas may notice that Bourekas and empanadas sort of look very much alike. What Bourekas are is a small pastry turnover, hand pie if you will, filled with all sorts of savory fillings, typically things like potato, cheese, spinach, mushrooms, etc. Earlier versions that are still popular for home-based or homemade Bourekas, less popular in stores and restaurants, are things like pumpkin and eggplant. The story is that they kept cooking these foods when they got to Turkey, and in Turkey, the most popular food that was available in the 1500s was something known as börek. Still very popular in Turkey today. Börek are large, and they too fill a pastry with these similar fillings, potato, cheese, etc. The main difference is that they are significantly larger. While a börek may be about 3 inches or so in diameter, börek are usually about 9 to 12 inches at the very least, and they're often cut up into smaller pieces to facilitate eating. The most common or most famous type of börek is known as kol böreki. That means arm börek because it's kind of spiral, which kind of looks like a folded arm. And so when the Jews from Spain discovered the börek and they said, hey, börek have good filling, why don't we take those fillings and stick them into our empanadas in place of the traditional meat and vegetable fillings that they had been using in Spain? And thus the börek was born. What that did is it gave the Jews a finger food version of börek, which is pretty good for a mobile people like the Jews. And it also gave the Jews a non-meat version of their empanada so they could have it with a dairy meal and still keep the laws of kashrut, of kosher. And so we see this new food coming about as the result of our moving from one place to another, combining something from our previous home with something from the new home. This, of course, relates to the question of what makes a food into a new one along the continuum of foods. I believe that what makes Bourekas something newer than börek, first of all, is the size. These are small, bitten into, eaten whole or almost whole, while a börek has to be cut up into pieces to be eaten. Also, the fillings differentiate them. While there are some overlapping fillings, many of the fillings that are traditional in Bourekas are not typically found in börek. Also underscoring that these are a new food is the name. Yes, Boureka and börek sound very similar, but Boureka has the A at the end, which is a Spanish diminutive. So these are Sephardic Jews who are saying these are little versions of börek. You have a big börek and a little Boureka. Bourekas are super popular throughout the Sephardic diaspora, particularly for what is known as desayuno. Desayuno means breakfast, but in particular for Sfaradim, for Jews who trace their origins to Spain and Portugal, desayuno is the special Saturday morning, Shabbat morning breakfast. And Bourekas are one of the classic pastries, the three main ones clumped together in what is known as the three B's. The other two are known as bulemas and boyos. While bulemas and boyos I don't have the time to go into here, and I'll be focusing on Bourekas, I will say that on my blog you can find numerous posts about Bourekas, bulemas, and boyos, differentiating them. And I will also link to one or two of those posts in the episode notes for this podcast. It's a good time for me to also mention that every episode has full episode notes available on my blog at tasteofjew.com. Now, what's also interesting is that many of these different types of Bourekas and bulemas and boyos also have different names in different parts of the Sephardic diaspora. So Bourekas are sometimes called bureke, borekitas, burekakia. Those typically have meat. And you can see that those are all related to Bourekas. But other names, for example, are handrajos. And some purists will only refer to the ones in an empanada type of a dough as a Boureka. Ones that are made with puff pastry or phyllo dough are typically called phila or phylika. Bourekas have become so popular in Israel that they've become a catch-all for everything. So in fact, what is actually kol boregi, the classic borek, in Israel is called a Turkish bureka, which is kind of funny going backwards. But to me, it's not really worth fighting about. They're all good, and only geeks like me know the difference. This is what my guest will be talking about using the name Boureka. She's actually referring to a kol boregi, sliced open and filled with all kinds of delicious stuffings. My guest today is Chani Apfelbaum, a cookbook writer, blogger, Instagram personality, etc. She is known as Busy in Brooklyn. That is the name of her website, and she's published the cookbooks Millennial Kosher and Totally Kosher. And I speak with her about her borek recipe. You have in your second book a Bourekas recipe with all kinds of stuff in it. Tell me a little bit about your development of that recipe.
So growing up, to me, a Boureka was just like, I always wanted potato Boureka, not the cheese Boureka, but that's what it was. It was basically pastry, puff pastry, phyllo pastry stuff with cheese or potato. But I never experienced like a fully loaded Boureka like you get in the shuk, where they split it open and they stuff it with eggs and chimichurri and tahina and matbucha and all the toppings that you want. So when I went to Giver Boureka, I don't know if that was with your tour. Was it? Maybe?
I don't know. For those who, I may not have mentioned, but I did take Chani on a tour at Machane Yehuda.
You did. That's what we met. So when I went there, that was like a total revelation for me. I'm like, this is the way you eat a Boureka. Wow, it's a sandwich. It's not just a snack, you know? So in my book, I actually made it into a real sandwich from scratch, you know, making the Boureka and then splitting it in half and stuffing it with all the fillings.
So I'm curious, in your book and in your cooking and in your I assume also on your blog, a lot of the creative foods that you come up with are sort of combining two things, you know, like something traditional with something less traditional, or maybe from two different cuisines. Whereas the Bourekas is one of those examples where you didn't get creative with it; you just kind of kept it as it was, which is still really good. I mean, you made it, you know. But yeah. Was there a thought process, or is it just like it just felt right as it was?
Some things are just perfection, you know, like as much as I love putting a new spin on tradition, there are some things that, like, you know, chicken soup, you don't mess with chicken. The truth is I did mess with chicken soup. Actually, funny story, but like I did a riff on potato latkes that actually made for the Wall Street Journal, and they came to my house and I made the recipe from scratch, and I made poutine latkes. Poutine is like, you know what that is?
Sure. But why don't you explain it for those who don't know?
It's basically the national dish of Quebec, and it's French fries smothered in cheese curds and gravy. And that's traditionally not kosher because gravy is made from meat and the cheese curds are cheese. So coming up with a umami-rich gravy that's pareve, so you can have the cheese curds. I did that with a Parmesan gravy, and I did it on potato latkes. So they interviewed my bubby, and she said, it turns my stomach just thinking about it. Like, why do you mess with tradition like that? You know, potato latkes are good on their own.
Is your bubby also from Montreal?
No.
So it turned her stomach because of the latkes, not because of what you did to poutine.
Exactly. She just like felt like certain things should be kept traditional. And I definitely, that resonates with me.
So maybe there's something about that. There was a few others I think like that are fairly traditional. Like the sabich salad that you have is also a very traditional way of serving it.
So I think with sabich, like because it's such a kind of already a mishmash of so many different interesting ingredients. You have a fried eggplant and the potatoes and the amba, the spina and the eggs, and it's very busy. It's very flavorful. It's colorful. All the things that I love about food. Why switch it?
So mainly one of the things that I'm focusing on in this episode is how Jews have transported food around the world. And often as we move foods around the world, they combine in some way and create something new. I'd love to hear about if you can think of one or two of your recipes that you've developed that deals with that, where something that you found somewhere else and when you brought it to America, you mixed it with something American.
You know what? Everyone always says there's nothing new in food, and I don't agree with that at all because I'm all about like I always like to say that my recipes are not Googleable. They don't exist. I want when people look at my books that they turn the page and they're like, wow, how did you think of that? In the modern age, we're all looking for something new and exciting and fresh and fusion cuisine, and also like branching out and trying out new global foods and learning how to make them kosher. So I love doing fusion, and I can't say I do it so much with American cuisine necessarily. How you're saying like American food doesn't speak to me so much, but even like now the smash burger trend that everyone's doing with like where you smash the burger and put the tortilla on top. So like I made it like Middle Eastern where I used ground turkey, I mixed it with shawarma spice and then smashed it with a half a pita, and then I flip it over and then I put like all the Israeli condiments on it. So Israeli salad and sumac onions and trina and Israeli pickles and.
And I don't recall, was it you or somebody else who did smashed falafel?
I did smash falafel in my new book as well. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I thought I saw it there. So that's another example of it.
Yeah. I love the smash falafel because it's like more surface area. So you get all the crispy bits all around. I pulse it so it's a little chunky and not very finely pureed. So you get little crispy bits of chickpeas in there. It's just so good. It's such a mouthfeel, the crunch. I love a good crunch. I'm a texture girl. So
I've done falafel coated schnitzelwaffle, as I call it.
oh, yum. That sounds delicious.
It's all yours to try.
Okay.
Now, as I said, what's interesting to me is how since Jews have moved all over the world and actually transported foods around the world, sometimes that has unexpected effects on the foods themselves, Bourekas being a prime example. We took the empanadas to the Ottoman Empire, mixed them or crossed them with borek and got the bureka. Another example that we just mentioned is amba. Amba is a really interesting condiment, very popular in Israel, but its origins are actually in India. It is a curried pickled mango sauce, and one of the big Jewish communities in India were the Baghdadi Jews, Jews from Iraq. And in India, they discovered a similar condiment and altered it slightly for their tastes, using sweet, ripe mangoes rather than the sour, unripe ones in the original. This became popular in Iraq, where their family members learned of this from the Baghdadi Jews in India. And later they brought it to Israel when many of them immigrated here. But again, that's the result of our moving to different places. Another example, in a different way, is a Georgian meat stew called chalia. It is a meat stew in a pomegranate walnut sauce and ended with a lot of herbs in it. And I see in this what this ancient Georgian Jewish community did, mixing foods from Persia. Similar, for example, there's a great, popular, famous Persian meat stew called fesenjan that has this same or similar pomegranate walnut sauce. But many of the spices are more common in Georgia than they are in Persia. And the ending with putting in lots of fresh herbs is very similar to a popular Georgian meat stew called chochochbili. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, but that is the name. And what we see in chalia, a dish that is seen throughout Georgia as a Jewish food, is something that mixes culinary elements both from Persia and from Georgia coming up with a new food. Even among American Jewish foods, we see some of these changes take place. For example, pastrami, which I will be discussing in a later episode, so I'll only touch on right now. But pastrami has its origins in Romania. There, however, it was typically goose that was prepared in the way that is pastrami. In fact, in Israel, pastrami typically is turkey pastrami. Only in America, where beef was so common and so inexpensive, did the pastrami preparation get applied to beef. And so pastrami as we know it in America or in American Jewish delis is actually the result of Jews from Europe moving to the United States. So with all of these foods and many others, we see the culinary outcome of a traveling people that has moved and spread all over the world. Not only that we've moved everywhere, but that we keep contact and often trade and move foods from one place to another. The result being many new foods that come about via a culinary fusion of different cuisines. In my next episode, I will be discussing a classic Jewish food from Persia, and that is known as gondi. And my guest will be Tanaz Sassouni. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed. Got any questions or comments? Please feel free to email me at jewishfoodbook@gmail.com. Please listen, like, and follow wherever you get your podcasts, and I would truly appreciate it if you'd share this with other Jewish food lovers. The theme music you hear is Adir Hu Revisited by Rebbe Soul. Check him out wherever you stream music. And as always, until next time, I wish you B'tei Avon.